June 5, 2020, 5 a.m. A frantic 911 call reaches the emergency dispatch center in Hanahan, South Carolina. On the other end of the line is 37-year-old Matthew Speck. His breathing is heavy. His voice trembles as he tells the dispatcher that two armed intruders broke into his home in the quiet Eagle Landing neighborhood. According to Matthew, he and his wife were asleep when the men suddenly attacked them. He claims he fought back, but was injured during the struggle. He says the attackers escaped only moments before police arrived. Within minutes, patrol officers reached the house. The neighborhood is still wrapped in darkness. Officers quickly secure the property and begin checking every possible entrance. Almost immediately, something feels wrong. The front door is locked. Every window is intact. There are no signs of forced entry. Nothing suggests that anyone broke into the house. As officers move carefully through the first floor, everything appears surprisingly normal. Furniture is in place. Electronics remain untouched. Nothing looks disturbed. But when they reach the upstairs bedroom, the investigation changes forever. Lying motionless on the bed is 33-year-old Caitlyn Speck. She has suffered fatal gunshot wounds. At the foot of the bed lies Bailey May, the family's beloved golden Labrador. She too has been shot and killed. The scene is silent. Matthew is found alive with blood on his clothing. Fresh cuts cover his forearms and abdomen. He repeats the same story to detectives. Two strangers broke into the house. They attacked both of them. He survived. His wife didn't. At first glance, it sounds like a tragic home invasion. But as crime scene investigators begin documenting every inch of the property, Matthew's version of events starts falling apart. Nothing has been stolen. Cash remains inside wallets. Jewelry is untouched. Expensive laptops and electronics are exactly where they should be. No drawers have been opened. No rooms have been searched. The house looks almost untouched, except for the bedroom where Caitlyn lost her life. If robbery was the motive, why did the intruders leave everything behind? That question becomes the first crack in Matthew's story. To understand what really happened inside that house on June 5th, investigators have to go back more than a decade. The story begins in 2008. That was when Caitlyn Conran first met Matthew Speck during a local community event. Friends described Caitlyn as creative, kind, and deeply devoted to the life she was building. She worked as a designer from home, allowing her to spend most of her days in the quiet Eagle Landing neighborhood. Her constant companion was Bailey May. To Caitlyn, Bailey wasn't just a pet. She was family. Over the years, Caitlyn and Matthew built what appeared to be a comfortable life together. They purchased a home, made improvements to the property, planned future renovations. To outsiders, they looked like a stable couple with a promising future. Caitlyn often spoke excitedly about redesigning parts of the house. She spent hours researching materials, sketching ideas, and imagining what their dream home would eventually become. She loved working from home. She loved the peaceful neighborhood, and she believed she and Matthew were building a future together. But behind closed doors, the relationship had quietly begun to change. Close friends would later tell investigators that Caitlyn had become increasingly worried about her marriage. Matthew had grown distant. He spent more time away from home. Their conversations had become cold and emotionally empty. Even so, Caitlyn never talked about leaving. She continued investing both her time and money into the home they shared. She believed things could still be repaired. What she didn't know was that someone inside that very home may already have been planning the end of her. The crime scene was now under the control of forensic investigators. Every room, every doorway, every window, every square inch of the Speck home was photographed, measured, and carefully examined. Their first objective was simple: how had the intruders entered the house? But after hours of inspection, the answer remained the same: they hadn't. The front door showed no damage. The deadbolt was still functioning perfectly. Every downstairs and upstairs window was locked from the inside. The screens were undisturbed. There were no pry marks, no broken glass, no damaged locks. It was as if no stranger had ever entered the home. Inside, the evidence became even more confusing. Caitlyn's purse sat untouched on a hallway table. Cash was still inside. Her credit cards were exactly where they belonged. In the living room, expensive laptops, tablets, and electronics remained in plain sight. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had even been moved. If this had been a robbery, it was the strangest robbery detectives had ever seen. Investigators then searched for another crucial piece of evidence: footprints. A violent struggle involving multiple people almost always leaves traces. Mud, dust, scuff marks, blood transfer, anything. But the floors were remarkably clean. No unknown shoe prints. No signs that two armed men had rushed through the house. No evidence of a desperate
the loss
fight.
Of the dog became
Only
a
one
critical
bedroom
piece
told
of
the story of violence.
in understanding the
And
suspect's
that story
logic.
didn't match Matthew's version.
Ballistics confirmed
According to
that
Matthew,
Bailey May
two
had
intruders
been shot
entered the
with
bedroom,
the same weapon
opened fire,
used on Caitlyn
wounded him,
Speck.
and escaped
The angle
just before
of the bullet
police arrived.
suggested the shot
But
was
forensic
fired.
reconstruction exposed a major problem. To leave the house, the killers would have needed to unlock the front door, walk outside, then somehow lock both the deadbolt and interior latch again. From the outside, an impossible task, unless they possessed keys. Detectives searched the property from top to bottom. No spare keys were missing. No lock-picking tools were found. No evidence suggested anyone else had entered or left the home. Slowly, the home invasion theory collapsed. The evidence pointed toward a much simpler conclusion. When the gunshots were fired, only 3 living beings were inside that house: Caitlyn, Matthew, and Bailey May. Matthew was transported to the hospital for treatment. While doctors cleaned his wounds, detectives quietly waited for the medical findings. Matthew insisted he had been slashed during a violent struggle. But experienced trauma physicians immediately noticed something unusual. His injuries were shallow, clean, and remarkably controlled. There were no deep defensive wounds on his hands, no cuts across his palms, no injuries suggesting he had tried to grab a knife or protect himself during an attack. Instead, the cuts appeared in places that were easy for a person to reach on their own. Forensic specialists recognized the pattern almost immediately. These looked like hesitation wounds, the kind commonly associated with self-inflicted injuries. Bloodstain analysts reached a similar conclusion. The blood on Matthew's clothing showed very little movement. Had he truly been fighting for his life, the stains would have been chaotic. There would have been heavy smears, random sprays, evidence of rapid movement. Instead, the blood patterns were controlled and predictable, as if the injuries had been inflicted while he was standing still. Detectives also noticed something else. Matthew's story kept changing. Each interview produced slightly different details. Sometimes the intruders were tall. Sometimes they were shorter. Sometimes they wore dark clothing. Other times, he couldn't remember what they looked like at all. One detail never changed. Matthew always returned the conversation to his own injuries. But medical records showed they were minor. None were life-threatening. None required emergency surgery. The more investigators compared Matthew's account with the physical evidence, the harder it became to believe a home invasion had ever happened. Then investigators turned their attention to another victim, Bailey May. At first, the dog's death seemed like a tragic detail, but it soon became one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. Bailey May had always been more than a family pet. She was protective, alert, and according to neighbors, she never stayed quiet when strangers approached the house. Anyone walking near the front gate would usually be greeted by loud barking. Yet on the morning of June 5, no neighbors reported hearing Bailey bark before the gunshots. For detectives, that detail carried enormous weight. If two unknown intruders had entered the home, Bailey almost certainly would have reacted immediately. Instead, the evidence suggested she remained calm, which meant she most likely recognized the person moving through the house. Ballistics testing revealed another important detail. The bullet that killed Bailey came from the same firearm used to kill Caitlyn. She had been shot at close range while lying in her usual sleeping spot beside the bed. She hadn't tried to run, she hadn't attacked anyone. She appeared completely unaware of the danger until the very last second. Investigators asked themselves a simple question. Why would robbers risk wasting ammunition on a family dog if their goal was simply to steal valuables? The answer made far more sense under a different theory. Someone wanted complete silence. Someone wanted nothing to interrupt the plan. Bailey wasn't killed because she was dangerous. She was killed because she could expose the truth. Even after death, she became one of the strongest witnesses against the only surviving person inside the home. While detectives continued processing the crime scene, digital forensic specialists began examining Matthew Speck's electronic devices, his mobile phone, his laptop, his internet activity. Unlike human memory, digital evidence doesn't forget. And what investigators found would dramatically change the direction of the case. Only days before the shooting, Matthew had searched for information related to staged crime scenes. Investigators discovered repeated searches about making a murder appear like a robbery. There were also searches involving poisons, methods of killing, and ways investigators analyze crime scenes. These weren't random internet searches. They showed a clear pattern. He had spent significant time reading detailed discussions and planning scenarios. Detectives also recovered screenshots of neighborhood maps. Some highlighted possible escape routes. At first glance, they appeared to support Matthew's story, but in reality, they suggested preparation, not panic. Even more damaging was the timing. Many of these searches had been made late at night, while Caitlyn was still alive. Hours that prosecutors would later argue were spent planning rather than sleeping. For investigators, the digital evidence became impossible to ignore. The crime scene had raised suspicion. The internet history gave those suspicions direction. The next step was understanding motive. Why would a husband want to kill his wife? Detectives interviewed friends, relatives, co-workers, and people from Matthew's past. One former girlfriend revealed that Matthew had recently reconnected with her. She provided investigators with messages that painted a very different picture from the happy marriage Matthew had described. In those conversations, Matthew spoke about wanting a new beginning. He suggested his marriage was standing in the way of the life he wanted. Another witness, one of Matthew's co-workers, revealed something equally significant. Matthew rarely complained about Caitlyn herself. Instead, he complained about money, about the house, about what a divorce would cost him. According to the co-worker, Matthew had openly discussed how difficult it would be to divide their property. He believed Caitlyn would never agree to sell the home. Investigators also learned he had asked unusual questions. What happens to jointly owned property if one spouse suddenly dies? The question seemed harmless at first, but after everything detectives had already uncovered, it sounded very different. Piece by piece, the motive became clearer. A divorce could cost Matthew financially. Murder, he believed, would not. It was a plan built on greed, and the mistaken belief that a staged crime scene could fool modern forensic science. The investigation was now approaching its final and most decisive stage. Matthew Speck would soon have to explain the evidence that had been building against him from every direction. With the forensic reports complete and the digital evidence secured, detectives invited Matthew Speck back for another interview. This time, the conversation was very different. Investigators already knew where his story didn't fit. They simply wanted to see if he could explain it. Matthew repeated the same account. Two masked intruders entered the house. They attacked him, killed Caitlyn, then disappeared. A detective listened carefully before asking one simple question. If you chased the intruders toward the front door, how did officers find that same door locked from the inside? Matthew hesitated. At first, he suggested he must have locked it himself after the attackers fled. Moments later, he changed his timeline. Then he claimed he couldn't remember exactly what had happened. The inconsistencies continued to grow. Detectives placed photographs of the crime scene on the table. The untouched valuables, the locked doors, the clean floors, the bloodstain analysis. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Then came the final blow. Investigators presented the digital evidence, his internet searches, the articles about staging crime scenes, the research into poisons, the planning that had taken place before Caitlyn's death. For several long moments, Matthew said nothing. The room fell silent. By then, detectives believed they had uncovered the truth. There had never been intruders. The crime scene had been staged from the beginning. Matthew Speck was arrested and charged with Caitlyn's murder. As prosecutors reconstructed the timeline, a chilling picture emerged. The attack did not begin at 5 o'clock in the morning. It had begun hours earlier. According to investigators, Matthew waited until Caitlyn was asleep. He retrieved the firearm, entered the bedroom, and fired the fatal shots before she had any chance to defend herself. Bailey May remained beside the bed, trusting the person she had known for years. Moments later, she, too, was shot. With no witnesses left inside the house, Matthew allegedly began creating the scene he hoped police would believe. He left valuables untouched to avoid unnecessary damage. He moved carefully through the home. Then, using a sharp object, he inflicted shallow wounds on himself. Only after everything had been prepared did he call 911 and claim to be the victim of a home invasion. But forensic science revealed what the staged scene tried to hide. The evidence spoke more clearly than any statement ever could. When the case finally reached court, prosecutors focused on facts rather than emotion. Forensic specialists explained why Matthew's injuries were inconsistent with a violent struggle. Ballistics experts demonstrated how the bullet trajectories matched a shooter standing calmly inside the bedroom. Digital forensic analysts walked the jury through Matthew's internet history and the timing of his searches. Friends, co-workers, and former acquaintances described the growing problems inside the marriage and Matthew's concerns about divorce and property. The defense argued that investigators could not completely rule out unknown intruders. But prosecutors returned to the same question that had haunted the investigation from the very beginning. How could strangers enter, commit the crime, and leave a house that remained locked from the inside without leaving a single trace? The evidence left the jury with very little doubt. After days of testimony, deliberations began. They did not last long. The jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty. Matthew Speck was convicted of murdering Caitlyn Speck, along with the related offenses presented at trial. The sentence ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For Caitlyn's family, the verdict could never erase their loss. But it did bring an end to years of questions. Today, the case remains a powerful reminder that carefully staged crimes often collapse under careful forensic examination. A locked door, a quiet crime scene, a loyal dog who never barked, a digital trail that couldn't be erased. Individually, each clue raised questions. Together, they revealed the truth. Behind the appearance of a perfect suburban life, investigators uncovered a calculated plan driven by deception, greed, and betrayal. In the end, it wasn't a confession that solved the case. It was the evidence. And for Caitlyn Speck and Bailey May, that evidence became the voice they no longer